Hello everybody, welcome to Tuesdays with the Pilgrim. We continue our story with Christian's journey to the celestial city with chapter 16, part 2. They discuss godly fear. Now that we are by ourselves, hopeful, what do you think of such people? Do you think that at any time they feel the conviction of sin and fear that they are in a dangerous condition? No, you answer your question since you are the older one. Then I will say that I think sometimes they may. But they, being naturally ignorant, don't understand that such convictions are not for their good. Therefore they desperately try to stifle and hide them, and presumptuously continue to soothe their egos in the best way they know how. I believe as you do, said Hopeful. I also believe that fear can be very beneficial in prompting them to begin their pilgrimage on the right foot. Without a doubt, if it is a godly fear, for the word says, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom." Will you elaborate on what you believe is the right kind of fear, Christian? Well, I believe godly fear is recognized by three things. First, by what causes it, the type of conviction of sin that leads to salvation. Next, you can see that it drives the soul to grasp and cling tightly to Christ for salvation. And finally, it brings to birth and maintains within the soul a deep reverence for God, His word and His ways, keeping the heart tender and making it afraid to turn from these things. That person will turn neither to the right nor to the left. He won't want to do anything that might bring dishonor to God, interrupt His peace with God, grieve the Spirit of God, or give an enemy reason to speak scornfully of God or His kingdom. Well said, Hopeful responded. I believe that you have spoken the truth. Do you think that we are almost out of the enchanted ground? Why, are you getting tired of this discussion? Asked Christian. No, definitely not. But I would like to know where we are. I don't believe we have more than 2 miles farther to travel on this ground, but let's return to our subject. Those who are ignorant don't realize that such convictions, which are intended to instill fear in them, are for their own good. Therefore they seek to stifle those feelings. How do you think they seek to stifle them? Asked Hopeful. One way is by thinking that such fears were brought about by the devil. But the truth is that they are from God. In thinking this, they consequently begin resisting the fear as if it were a threat to their very existence. A second way is to think that these fears will spoil their faith, when in fact these unfortunate people possess no true faith anyway, so they harden their hearts against the fear. A third way is to presume that they should project an image of courage, so they harden their hearts, repress the fear, and choose to become presumptuously confident. A fourth way is that when they notice that such fears tend to erode confidence in their sense of personal righteousness, they determine to resist them with all their might. I know something of this myself, said Hopeful. Before I understood these things, I was just like that. Chapter 16, Part 3. They discuss backsliding. Why don't we leave our neighbor Ignorance by himself for now, suggested Christian. Let's discuss another beneficial question. Yes, that's a great idea, but you go ahead and choose the topic of discussion again. Well, Christian began, about 10 years ago there was a man named Mr. Temporary living in our region. He was a very impulsive sort of man. Did you know him? Yes, I certainly did, answered Hopeful. He lived in the town of Graceless, about 2 miles from Honesty. I believe he lived next door to Mr. Turnback. That's him. Actually, he lived under the same roof with Mr. Turnback. I believe that once he experienced an awakening in his life where he suddenly had some insight into his sins and the wages that they would bring him. Yes, I believe that's true, said Hopeful. My house wasn't over 3 miles from his, and he would often come to me in tears. I really felt for the man, and even had some hope for him. But as we all may see, not everyone who cries, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven. He once told me that he had resolved to go on a pilgrimage, said Christian. but then he suddenly got acquainted with one called Save Self. After that, he treated me like a stranger. Since we are talking about him, why don't we try to figure out why he and others suddenly backslide, offered Hopeful. It may be of some profit, but you go ahead and begin. Well, said Hopeful, in my judgment, there are 4 reasons for it. First of all, though the conscience of the person is awakened, their minds remain unchanged. Therefore, when the strength of the guilty feelings wears off, that which drove them to be religious ceases. So, quite naturally, they return to their former ways again. This is like a dog that is sick from what he has eaten. As long as the sickness persists, he will keep vomiting it up. He doesn't do this on purpose, but because his stomach is upset. But as soon as the sickness is over and his stomach is soothed, because his desires are not at all alienated from his vomit, he turns around and licks it right back up. So what is written is true. A dog returns to its vomit. Therefore, I think they are eager for heaven only out of a sudden sense of and fear of the torments of hell. But as soon as this sense of hell and fear of damnation is gone, their desire for heaven and eternal happiness dies also. At that point, they simply return to their former course. Another reason is this. They have an oppressive fear that is overpowering to them. I am speaking of the fear that they have of men, for the fear of men will prove to be a snare. So although they seem to be on fire for the kingdom of heaven, as long as the flames of hell are lapping around their ears, when the terror subsides, they begin to have second thoughts. Namely, they think that it is good to be wise and not to run the risk of losing too much for who knows what. If not fearing they will lose all, then they at least fear they will bring themselves into unavoidable and unnecessary conflict. So they once again fall back into step with the world. A third reason is that the scorn that so often accompanies a sincere religious experience is a stumbling block to them. They remain proud and haughty, while true religion remains low and contemptible in their eyes. So when they have lost their sense of hell and the wrath to come, they again return to their former course. Fourth, I believe that facing their guilt and contemplating the terrors to come are unbearable to them. They don't want to face their misery before the time comes. If they would heed the warning that has been given them, they would flee to where the righteous flee and find safety. But because they shun these thoughts of guilt and terror, once their realization has been effectively suppressed, they gladly harden their hearts and choose ways that will harden them more and more. Then Christian said, I think you are close to the mark, for the bottom line is that they need a change in their mind and in their wills. They are like the felon who stands before a judge. He will shake and tremble, repenting heartily. Underneath, however, there is the fear of punishment, not loathing for his offense. This soon becomes evident because if you give the man his freedom, he will go right back to his criminal activities. If his mind has been truly changed, his actions would be quite different. And now, said Hopeful, since we have discussed reasons for their backsliding, you tell me how it happens. I will try, said Christian. I believe it happens by degrees. First they try as much as they can to pull their thoughts away from remembering God, death, and the coming judgment. Then they gradually cast off their personal obligations, such as closet prayer, curbing their lust, being watchful, being sorry for sin, etc. Next they begin to shun the company of active and zealous Christians. Then they grow indifferent to their public obligations, such as attending church and other gatherings of believers. After this, they start nitpicking and look for the faults of other Christians. They find a flaw in them and thereby get an excuse to cast their faith behind their backs. Next, they often begin to run with a carnal, hedonistic crowd. After this, they give way to secret and profane discussions, and, incidentally, they are glad if they can find those with good reputations doing the same things. This enables them to use that person's example as an excuse to sin. Then they can easily begin to play with little sins openly. Finally, being hardened, they show themselves as they are. Once again they have been launched into the gulf of misery, and unless a miracle of grace prevents it, they will everlastingly perish in their own deceit. And that's the end of chapter 16, so we'll leave it there till next week, when we will pick up chapter 17, part 1, Enjoying the Country of Beulah. Until then, take care, stay safe, and God bless.